Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're going through the BIOS and giving you a quick rundown on some of the features on the rather awesome MSI B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video I'm going to go through, do a quick BIOS tour of the MSI B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. This is a pretty decent board actually for the AM5 platform. If you're looking at getting into it and you basically want all the features but you don't need necessarily all of the frills and you want something sort of mid-range, this is actually a cracking board and it does really, really well. Of course, you've got all the features such as unlocked processor, etc., so you can tweak things however you want to, and we'll definitely be taking a look at that. There will be some things in the BIOS tour which I don't understand, if I'm completely honest with you, so we will gloss over some of those, but we'll be going through some of the ones which I generally tend to use to get the best out of my system. So let's get on with it. Now I should first of all say, I do apologise, there's actually roadworks going on right outside MUB headquarters at the moment, so if you hear any weird noises then my sincerest apologies. But we're going to start off here. So normally when you first boot up the PC you'll be greeted with this screen here. This is the MSI ClickBIOS version 5. This is the kind of like the easy mode. So you've got pretty much everything you need to know here. You've got your temperatures, core temperature, CPU core temperature. That is something to look at straight away on your new build. Make sure that's not getting overly elevated, and make sure it's somewhere around the sort of 50 degrees C, wherever it is. If you're hitting sort of 80 or 90 just in the BIOS, you've mounted your cooler wrong and you need to take a look at that, so do bear that in mind. It also tells you if you're in UEFI or CSM mode, tells you motherboard manufacturer details and also memory size. Also your BIOS, this is currently on a beta BIOS as of the time of recording. Yours may look slightly different or be a slightly different number. Over here on the left, so you've got gain boost. I would probably leave that turned off. We'll discuss that in more depth later on. Really, these new AM5 processors are basically balls to the wall all the time, so you don't really need any other additional boosting here. If anything, you want to downgrade or underclock the processor, but again, we'll check that out later. Now, a lot of people are going to get confused with this. So currently our RAM has both a XMP profile, which is the Intel specification, but we've also got our expo profiles here. So you're probably going to be wondering, well, which one should you use? Now, if you're using an AMD processor and your AMD RAM supports expo profiles, you should definitely use that. Now, expo works slightly differently from XMP, whereas it will try and basically train the memory to squeeze the very best performance out of it. Now, performance isn't exactly what you think it might be. Now, it may tweak the system, depending on your motherboard, your processor and your RAM. It may actually reduce some of the clocks. So don't be too concerned if you find out that you enable expo and your settings in the BIOS actually don't reflect what the RAM is supposed to be. It will be a very close approximation, but you may find that some of the secondary and tertiary timings may be slightly off. And that is basically expo tuning the RAM to your specific system, rather than just taking the manufacturer's defaults as it would do if you're using XMP. So definitely, if you are using your RAM, choose a expo profile from your RAM. On the side here, so you've got CPU, memory, storage, fan info and help. You also got an option here to go into MFlash to flash the BIOS from within the BIOS. You've also got favorites, so you can select your own favorites. You've also got hardware monitor, which is somewhere which we'll be taking a look at shortly. FTPM, that can be turned on or off here on the quick menus. Also ERP ready, so this is your power management. If you want the system to consume a little bit less power and possibly turn off things such as your USB lights when the system's in standby, that kind of thing, then you can turn on ERP. If you want the best performance possible, generally leaving ERP off will give you favorable results. Also, you can turn off your onboard HD audio controller. You can switch between CSM and UEFI. You can also choose whether or not your ports are in AHCI or RAID mode. And also you've got your easy LED control. So if you just want to turn off all your RGB, then just turn that off and your RGB lights will be off. Pretty simple. In the middle here, you've got your boot priorities, so you can move these around, drag them around, slide them around to however you want to. Obviously, generally you'd have your Windows Boot Manager or your UEFI hard disk as your primary boot, but again, you can swap those around should you want to boot from something else, either from the network, etc, etc. In the middle there, so you've got your CPU core frequency, you've also got your base clocks, CPU ratio, core numbers, 6 cores on this particular processor, the voltages, and what features are basically enabled as stock. You've also got F12, so you can take screenshots. Also up here, you've got the search option, so you can click in there and search for various things. So RAM, whatever, you can go in and find quick settings quite easily. So that's quite handy if you're not too sure where you're looking. Also, you can change the language up here, or if you click on the cross at the top, that will basically save and exit. We'll take a look at hardware monitor shortly in the other side. That is really good. Also fan info. Again, you can go through a lot of these, quick access, etc. It's actually a very good interface. I do like this interface a lot. It does work very well. Anyway, so that is the easy mode. Let's go into advanced mode. So basically, pretty much along the top here, exactly the same. We've still got our expo profile. So we've got settings, OC, M-Flash, OC profiles, hardware monitor, and beta runner. So beta runner is basically you can use some of the beta systems. So there's a self-test for drives, and there is I/O support for devices for when you're using virtual machines, that sort of thing. So let's go, first of all, we'll go into settings. So first of all, you've got your system status. That's going to tell you time, dates, etc. You can change your time and date. Also, will give you information about the system. Pretty straightforward stuff. In advance, you've got your resizable bar support. So if you want to turn it on, you can do that here. And also your PCI Express. So if you want to downclock those, you can do from auto if you're having problems with a particular device because it doesn't support PCI Express Gen 4, it's Gen 3 or Gen 2, whatever. You can choose that, and also the link between the actual chipset and the processor. So that is in there. You've got ACPI settings, so power LED and CPU over temperature alert, if you want to change any of those. Integrated peripherals, so this is where a lot of you are going to want to find out things. So this is your VGA detection, so you can set it to auto, or you can set it to ignore. Choice is yours. You've also got your onboard LAN controller, enabled or disabled, so that is to enable or disable the onboard LAN. Network stack, also onboard Wi-Fi module, so this is for Bluetooth and your Wi-Fi. So if your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi isn't working, check here, make sure that it is enabled. If it's set to disabled, obviously it won't work. Also got your SATA configuration, so you can choose RAID mode or AHCI as we discussed a little bit earlier, and also hot plug, which you should really never choose to have on in a Windows environment because it just doesn't work that way. And also HD audio, you can enable or disable if you want to disable the onboard audio. Not that you want to, because it's actually pretty decent. Integrated graphics configuration. This is going to be something new for AMD AM5 systems because now we do have integrated graphics as standard. So you can choose to have your initiate graphics adapter. So IGD is your integrated graphics display. So your onboard graphics, or PEG stands for PCI Express graphics. So if you're using an external card like a NVIDIA or AMD card or Intel card, then set it to PEG. You can also force the integrated graphics to be enabled. So you can choose, at the moment I've got mine disabled, but you can choose it to be forced to be enabled. UMA mode auto, so how much RAM it takes up, and also you can choose it to go into game mode, which to be honest with you, the onboard graphics is pretty pathetic, so I would either have it to UMA auto or disabled. I've got it disabled, I don't really tend to use it. It doesn't have any benefits for encoding or anything at the moment. Also got hybrid graphics, so if you want to, you can enable that. Choice is entirely up to you. That is going to be something which will be coming to systems shortly. You also got USB configuration, so you can turn on things like your XHCI handoff and legacy support. I would probably leave both of those enabled. Power management, again, ERP ready. I've got disabled restore after AC power loss. You can choose power on, last state, or power off. I leave it to power off because it's not a server or anything. So if it turns itself off, it's fine if it stays off. System power fault protection, I've got disabled. Again, if you want to, you can leave this enabled, depending if your power system in your house is a little bit ropey. Maybe you can try that. Again, entirely up to you. Again, if it's something which, if you've got slightly dodgy power, if you've got this set to enabled, you may find your PC actually won't switch on because the power isn't clean enough. So yeah, might be worth leaving that as disabled. Next, you've got your BIOS or CSM UEFI mode. Again, you can choose either. So if you've got older drives which aren't GPT, they're MBR drives, and you want CSM. For modern drives or fresh installs, you definitely want to use UEFI. Wake up events state up, so you can use here, so wake up by BIOS, wake up by OS, whatever you want to do, choose that. Secure Erase Plus, that is for wiping SSDs. MSI driver utility installer. This on ASUS boards is horrible, but on MSI boards is actually really helpful. So when you first install Windows, after it's kind of done its reboots, etc., and you go into Windows, you'll get a pop-up saying MSI driver utility, do you want to install these drivers? And it installs all the latest drivers from MSI's website directly. Very, very nice to use. I highly recommend it. Certainly easier than trolling off for the drivers yourself or installing the wrong drivers or no drivers. So definitely use that. You also got your AS Media SATA, so you can choose to have the additional SATA ports enabled or disabled. Entirely up to you. That is running off the AS Media chipset. And then we have AMD overclocking. So there's loads of places you can actually get overclocking on this board. So you've got the overclocking settings here, but you've also got AMD overclocking here. So we'll go in here now. You do have to accept the warnings. So yeah, it's fine. So you've got manual CPU overclocking, where you can basically plonk in all your details. Something you might find useful is the Proc VRM throttling. So you can choose to have that enabled or disabled. Set it to auto, whatever you want to do. Entirely up to you, but enabling it will basically stop the motherboard or the processor running over far in advance of what the actual motherboard is capable of. Although this is a really capable motherboard, so that shouldn't ever be a problem. So yeah, you could set that to auto. You've got DDR Infinity Fabric timing, so you've got your DDR option, timing, bus configuration, etc. Frequency dividers. Because now AM5 works kind of differently, so we don't have that real Infinity Fabric lock between the memory controller and the processor front side bus. So they're kind of unlocked now. So it doesn't really make as much difference. There still will be that sweet spot of somewhere around the kind of DDR5 6000. It's a tricky one. I would leave it to whatever it is set to. Generally it's going to be set to auto and it'll just detect what it wants to do. So set it to auto, you can't go too far wrong there. Or leave it to whatever the system decides is best for you. Precision Boost Overdrive. This is actually a cool section. We'll take a look at this in the OC section because you can get to it from there as well. But you can choose Precision Boost Overdrive. Now you've got Auto, Disable, Enabled, or Advanced. If you choose Auto, you basically lose the ability to change those settings. If you go for Enabled, it basically just turns it on. But if you want to actually tweak it, then you want to go to Advanced. So then you can choose things like your PBO limits, your scaler, your boost override. Now I've actually disabled mine. You can choose to do that if you want to. It depends on your processor and your thermal management. Also, you've got your platform thermal control. So if you set this to auto, it basically will do whatever it wants to, and it will try to hit 95 degrees C all the time. So if you set it to manual, you can set your platform thermal limit. So depending on what you're comfortable with, if you run Cinebench a few times and you see your processor going way, way, way above what it should be, then you can just set this down to something lower, so something you're comfortable with. Like I'm relatively comfortable with it hitting 90 degrees C because that is within its targets. It's not kind of the processor, it's more of the package reaching that temperature. So it's not like if you touched it, it was 90 degrees Celsius. This is an internal reading, so don't be too confused about that. It isn't going to be the temperature if you touch the top of the processor. It's an internal, basically an internal temperature. So you can set to what you want to. I've got 90, you can choose 80, 70, 60, 50. The lower you go, the lower it's going to let the processor actually kind of stretch its legs. It will reduce performance slightly, so you probably want to find your particular balance on your particular CPU. You've also got graphics curve optimizer. Again, you can choose to do that. I've got the onboard graphics disabled, so that also is disabled, but you can go in there if you want to and just do what you would with normal curve optimizer. So you'd regularly go and set it to a negative and set a magnitude of maybe, I don't know, 20 or something, and see how you get on with that. But again, we won't be doing that on this particular one because we're not using the onboard graphics. So curve optimizer, this is what a lot of you are going to want to know about. So curve optimizer, you can choose what you want to do here. Now, as you can see, I've got mine set to a curve optimizer negative of a magnitude of 30, which is actually the highest you can go. Now, it does seem 7600, 7600X, because of their lower core count, they will allow you to go to a higher negative, if that makes sense. So you may find that 30 won't work on your board. So you might want to try something like 20. See what works for you. See if it makes your system crash. I'm going to leave that as 20 now, because I've got a live stream to do later, which could make my PC crash. It did last time. That's another story. So there's your curve optimizer. Basically, set it to negative. Try 10. Reboot. Use the system. See if it's any better. If it is, great. Try 20. Increments of 5, whatever you want to do, but 30 is the maximum you can do. and obviously 0 is going to be no effect at all. So somewhere between 0 and 30, and you should find your optimum setting. So next is your voltage controls. All got those down through there. You can choose all those settings, uncore modes, etc. Voltage control. Most of that will be set by the system, so I would pretty much leave that if you want to. Again, I haven't put in any of these figures. It's basically just working out what it wants to do. You've got LN2 mode. I'm going to disable that because we're not using any liquid nitrogen, so it's a little bit pointless. You've also got your VDD mist control, set to auto. L-clock frequency control, again set to auto or manual. You can choose your maximum frequencies. I would leave that set to auto as well, no need to change that. Onboard voltage control, so again, leave those as they are. There's no real need to change those unless you're doing some extreme overclocking or really tweaking to get the best out of the system, which, to be honest, you don't really need to do. A lot of it is done quite well by AMD setup to begin with, so I would leave those as they are. So that is it for AMD overclocking, and that is, I think, it for that section. So next we've got boot, so you set your boot configuration, so your full screen logo. If you don't want to see the MSI logo, you can disable it or enable it. Numlock state, on or off. Boot info block, so this is basically allows the kind of user interface to have that kind of nice swishy look, so when you scroll from things that it all moves around the slides. Again, a bit pointless. Post beep, you can have that enabled or disabled, so if you've got a speaker connected to your motherboard, you want to hear it go beep when the system boots, then you can choose to do so. And this is your fixed boot order, so you can choose your boot order like we did at the top here with the slider. This is just a text-based version of the same thing, and if you've got more than one drive, then you can click on the BBS priorities and choose your boot options. So if you've got 2 different drives there, you can choose which one you want the system to actually boot from, so that all makes a lot of sense. Security, so you've got admin password for the actual motherboard. You can choose your U key, you can enable or disable for basically security purposes. Trusted computing, TPM device is found, it's on the processor. To be honest with you, most of you are going to be using Windows 11, so you're going to have that enabled anyway. So I would just pretty much forget all about all that stuff there, unless you need to reset anything. If you're using BitLocker, probably want to go in there and back up your keys, etc., in case you ever need to swap out a board or processor. All those kinds of usual things. Chassis intrusion configuration, so you can choose whether or not you use the pins on the board for a case which supports it, and also secure boot you can enable or disable, and you can set your standard or custom modes. Again, leave it as standard, should be absolutely fine. Save and exit is obviously pretty straightforward, so go save and exit, you've got all the options there, so you can discard your changes. If you're not liking them, you can save your changes and reboot. You can just save changes and still carry on, or you can discard changes. Restore back to the factory defaults, that might be handy for some of you if things go a little bit awry. And also you've got your boot override, so if you have a USB drive plugged in here, you can choose that, and then for the next boot cycle, it will try and boot from that device rather than your standard one. So that is it for settings. Let's go into OC. This is going to be basically more of the same, but more tailored around RAM more so. So you've got your 2 modes, expert and normal. Doesn't seem to be a great deal of difference between the two. So you've got your CPU ratio apply mode, so all core, or you can do it per CCD, or you can do adaptive. Set it to all core, that's going to be absolutely fine. CPU ratio, that's for overclocking, so if you want to put in a specific one, so say we go 4800 or 48 there, we can change that to 48. That's your basically your default clocks. If you want to downclock, then you could do that. Just set it to 4500, or if you just put a 0, it will go back to auto. Advanced CPU configuration, this is going to be more of the same what we saw just now. So this is the AMD overclocking thing again, precision boost overdrive, all that kind of stuff that we saw before. Core performance boost, you can set it to auto, basically leave all that to auto. There's no real need to change any of that stuff in there unless you want to. This is actually something which is a little bit different and new. So config TDP. So this is a way of really kind of undervolting or configuring your system so it doesn't get so hot. So if you've got a 105 watt processor like we have here, which is the 7600X, if you want to run it in eco mode, just hit 65 watts and it will basically undervolt the processor, use less wattage, run a lot cooler. So that is basically your kind of like your eco mode things. If you want to go balls to the wall, go to the top one and it will just basically release all of the limits. So your limitation will then be your cooling setup. Hopefully that makes sense. You can just switch between these. So maybe you think, well, 105 watts might be a bit much for my processor. It performs well, but it's a little bit too hot. So try 95 watts. Try it then. If it's still getting too hot, go down to 65 watts. You'll probably find the performance difference isn't huge between them, but when you start releasing your wattage, that's when things are going to start getting very warm. So again, set it to auto if you want to, and do manual configuration. That is your choice entirely. So you've got PSS support, PPC adjustments, so that is your P states, power states, your NX mode, so that's the ability to enable or disable non-execute page protection. That's a really old setting. SMV, not salt and vinegar, this is virtual machine, secure virtual machine. I'm going to disable that because we don't use any virtual machines on here. AVX control, so again you can disable AVX if you want to, which is one of those protocols or features which actually does make the system run a little bit hotter and a little bit more intensely. So if for some reason you don't need AVX, then you can turn that off entirely. You've also got your spread spectrum there, so if you want to, if you're getting interference for some reason from something, you can turn on that enabled. Well, basically it does something with the frequencies, so it just regulates them a little bit more. Again, if you're not sure, leave it set to auto. FCH base clock, so this is basically your front side bus speed. It's set to auto, but you can go in and change it should you wish to a specific setting. Generally it's going to be like 100. DRAM settings, so again we've got our XMP and expo. I described that to you a little bit earlier. There's two profiles on this particular stick of RAM. So we've got the profile 2, which is DDR5 5200 CL40, and profile 1 is DDR5 5600 CL36. So clearly, obviously, for better speed and latency, you probably want to use profile 1. DRAM frequency, again, you want to set that as auto, unless for some reason you're getting problems, or you want to keep the CAS latency but reduce the frequency. So say for instance you want to keep that frequency, but we could hit maybe a higher frequency, so maybe you could try 5800 just to manually overclock it a little bit should you want to. Again, probably best left set to auto unless you have a specific reason not to. You've got your F-clock frequency. You've also got your Div1 modes, high efficiency mode, etc. So this can actually get better memory performance. So if you want to basically enable that, that will give you your best possible memory performance, but that could actually instill some instability. So set it to auto, let it figure it out for itself. Memory try it, so you can choose various different memory types. So if you want to try a specific one, you can do, see how it works with your system. Basically this is kind of overclocking, but you can try different frequencies and what have you to see how well it works. Leave that set to disabled. Memory context restore, it's currently set to auto. This is something which is a little bit of a thing. So if you want your system to boot faster, then you'd set this to enabled. So basically when there is a complete boot of the system and it works and it's stable, next time you reboot, it will try and use the exact same settings to make the boot up process faster, which is something which Expo makes your system boot slower. It's just the way it is, because it trains the RAM every single time, because it's always looking to improve your system's stability, characteristics, etc., etc. So memory context restore will use the best known settings every single time without even trying to change them at all. So if you set to auto, the system will kind of configure itself, so it'll try and load some settings. If it likes them and it's happy, it will load straight up. If for some reason it thinks, well actually no, this isn't quite right, it will go ahead and it will retrain the RAM every single time that it needs to, or it feels that it's necessary. So again, that's going to be down to you. I'm okay with the system rebooting taking a lot longer. You may not be, so choose whichever suits your particular needs. You've also got the advanced DRAM configuration, so you can go in here manually and set your CAS latency, your secondary and tertiary timings, etc. All that kind of stuff, sub-timings, all that stuff is in here, should you wish to play around with that a little bit more. Then we can go down to our voltage settings. So your digital power, so you can go in here, set up your load line calibrations, etc. Pretty much leave those as auto, unless you have a reason not to, but yeah, you can go in there and leave that as it is. CPU core voltage, so you can reduce your core voltage there should you want to. Same for your North Bridge and SoC. voltage controls there, miscellaneous voltage, etc. You can see it's all there. So yeah, you get the general idea there. So I think that is pretty much in here. So you've got the option there for memory change detect. You probably want that set as enabled. Your CPU characteristics, and also memory Z, so it'll tell you your SPD readings from the chip, etc. So as you can see, DDR5 is actually 4800 as standard from Kingston, etc. And you've got your XMP ratings there, the two different lots. Yeah. Lots of information there should you need it. So that is it for the OC mode. Let's go into, well, basically M-Flash is how to flash the BIOS from within inside the BIOS, so it's a bit pointless. When there's a new BIOS that comes out for this board, I will do this and I'll make a video on it, so there is going to be some guidance on this should you need it, but it's really straightforward. You click on it, it goes into MBIOS, you have your USB drive with the BIOS on there, and it basically flashes it from there. It's very, very simple indeed. We've done videos on that hundreds of times, so if you need any help, again, do reach out on the Discord. So next one is going to be OC profiles. So again, from all the stuff in the OC we've done earlier, you can go in and you can save particular profiles, so you can rename them. So OC profile 1 could be high performance, profile 2 could be power saving, etc, etc, and you can obviously load those from ROM to the USB, from USB, etc, etc. That's pretty straightforward. Next one's hardware monitor. I like this a lot. MSI do a really good implementation of this. They really do, in my opinion. So this is basically where you set up all your fan speeds and your temperature monitoring. So you can see at the bottom, there is all the temperature monitoring, CPU core temperature, system temp, MOS temperature, chipset temps, etc, and also your voltages, all that kind of good stuff. There is a line here which shows you the kind of trajectory or the speeds, previous speed of the fan itself, and it starts off with the CPU fan. So you've got your pump fan, or pump header rather. You also got system fan 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 6, so tons of headers in here. You can configure them all individually, and you've also got the options for whether or not you monitor certain things. So you can monitor the CPU core, the system temperature, the MOSFET temperatures, or the chipset temperature, depending on what it is. So say for instance on system fan 6, which might be at the front, at the bottom or something, you could choose that to cool your chipset. Or conversely, if you've got one by the VRMs, maybe system fan 4, you could choose that for MOS. So it'll monitor those. Okay, entirely up to you, but so you can go through, make sure you set your headers to the right thing. So if you've got a CPU fan with 4 pins, choose PWM. If there's 3 pins, DC. Auto, generally, I don't find works particularly well, so I would avoid using the auto. Probably better to set them manually. And also you've got smart fan mode, which you can enable or disable. Realistically, smart fan mode makes the most sense, so you can move your settings and speed up your fan however you see fit, and have your temperature source here. So again, basically from here, so you can choose your CPU core, system, MOSFET, so we choose CPU core, and you've got your step up time and step down time, so it's 0.1 second. So between the system core temperature, as we've got it set here, going up, it takes 0.1 of a second for the fans to react. So if you want your step down time to be slightly longer, to give you a little bit more cooling potential, then you can definitely do that. Or if you don't want your fans to react to random spikes in temperature, you can set your step up time to a higher setting, so maybe 1 second or something, which will obviously alleviate that. Or you can just adjust the curve. So if you have a lower curve, it's obviously not going to be as reactive. I generally set it to 60 degrees at 60, 40% speed at 40. You get the general idea. So again, all those settings there, it's all pretty good. You've also got your help section here and your about section. I think that is pretty much it. So yeah, all your fan settings can be done in there. And your pump setting. My pump is a DC 3 pins, so a little bit of a curve there. Actually, let's turn that up. So if you want your fan or your pump to be 100% all the time, then you can set it there. So that is, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for there. So we can close that down now. That will save all the settings. Yeah, I think that's it. So we've done hardware monitor, beta runner, etc. Pretty much covered it. So again, if you've got any other questions, then let me know. I think that is pretty much going to wrap this up. Obviously, when you come out, if you click on the X, it will tell you exactly what is been changed and give you the option to save it or not. and I think I will probably save that. So yeah, I think that's fine. So I am going to click yes and let the system reboot. So there you go, there is a little bit of a tour of the BIOS on the MSI Tomahawk B650 Wi-Fi. It's a great little board, it really is. I was slightly hesitant because the prices aren't exactly the cheapest, but it does seem, in terms of what we get performance-wise, so even with this lower-end Ryzen processor, which is the 7600X, it kind of doesn't compete with what you'd expect from the previous kind of range, like the 5600, the 3600, 2600s, etc. The performance level has gone right up, the bar has been raised. So the prices have gone up, but the entry level has also. So yeah, it is swings and roundabouts. But for me, I think as soon as they manage to get the idles right, at the moment AMD have got this weird thing, so they try and keep the frequency high all the time. They don't want to reduce the clocks, which I think is needed to get those temperatures and the idle usage down. That would be fantastic. Fortunately, this, if anything, does happen. MSI have very frequent BIOS updates, so when that becomes available, which no doubt it will do to be competitive, we'll probably be doing videos on that and telling you all about it. But sadly, it isn't in the system at present. But other than that, I think it's a great little BIOS, pretty easy to navigate. All the settings are in there, and there's more than one way to get to pretty much everything, so there's not really a wrong way of doing it. But if you feel that you're a little bit out of your depth and you're not too sure what's going on, please feel free to reach out in the comment section below, or on our Discord. You're more than welcome to join there and get some more up-to-date advice and a little bit quicker advice should you need it. So I think it's going to wrap this up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.